It was raining heavily and Henry was having coffee along a roadside restaurant enjoying the rain. He was glad to get some time alone to think, and he had a lot on his mind lately. His life felt like it was moving at breakneck speed, from college graduation to being an agent for hire. It was all happening too fast and yet at the same time not enough of anything had happened. All in all, it was overwhelming for Henry, who wanted nothing more than to just relax with no worries about what came next. He could feel himself getting drowsy as he sat there, leaning on his elbows, when suddenly he heard footsteps coming from behind him. He turned around to see George standing there, staring into the distance as if lost in thought. When he noticed Henry looking at him, he smiled, though it wasn't quite real. They stood like that in silence for several seconds before George broke the silence. "I didn't realize you were here." Henry laughed softly. "Neither did I, but hey, here we are." George shook his head. "Do you want something?" They had been best friends since they met in kindergarten. Although George knew that Henry didn't share his feelings very clearly, but he didn't push him. George took a seat next to him. The two boys sat there for several minutes in complete silence. Eventually, George spoke. "You know, when I saw you walking here today, I just couldn't help myself. I went over after work, to apologize, and explain everything." Henry sighed before speaking. "Well, you've already apologized, haven't you? You said sorry for the way you treated me in the past, and I appreciate it. We're good now. I'd hate for us to be drifting apart again." He paused momentarily. "I also really wish you hadn't tried so hard for so long." George nodded slowly as his gaze fell back onto his hands, clasped tightly in his lap. "I can understand why you would. I'm not sure I deserve it. I don't think I ever have. But I'm really sorry for what I did." This time Henry reached out, taking his friend's hand in his own. As much as it pained him to admit it, it wasn't as difficult for them as it used to be. Henry squeezed George's hand reassuringly. "We're better now. And I want to respect each other even if we don't always agree." George invited Henry over a cup of tea on weekend. They revitalized their childhood memories and watched a TV series together. "George, can I ask you something?" Henry: "Yeah." "George, you aren't the same Henry I used to have as a friend. You have lost your spark. And you look sad. Are you fine?" At this, Henry's face expression changed and he started crying bitterly. "George, oh, come on. There's no need to cry. I didn't mean it like that." "Henry, I feel very lonely. Since we had clashes between us, I never made a friend. All these years, I have lived alone. I don't find happiness in little things. I feel a void in myself. And whenever I needed any help, no one was there to help me." "Oh. That's terrible. I know we ended our friendship, but a part of me always missed you. I craved your company. But I was afraid you will not accept my apology." "Henry, no one ever talked to me until you, George. Everyone else has stopped talking to me after I moved away. I'm not surprised they have given up on me." "George, okay, let's talk about other things. Cheer up. Wouldn't it be great if you join me for a lunch on weekend?" Henry: "Okay, I will." On Sunday, Henry woke up and dressed himself in the best of clothes. He was going on a date with his best friend, George. He was happy. Even though he missed him, he was able to move on without having any problems. He was doing well. He grabbed the keys to the car and left his house. He drove towards the city center where he spotted George outside the restaurant, waiting for him. They exchanged greetings and headed inside. Once they got seated, they started eating. Henry found it hard to concentrate as he looked at his friend, wondering how his life had changed in such a short span of time. George seemed to feel the same. He looked at Henry, trying to figure out what was bothering him. "Hey, how are you doing?" George asked, concerned. Oh yeah, I'm fine." Henry responded nonchalantly, trying to hide his concern. He continued eating and drinking his tea. After a while of silence, George decided to break it once more. "What happened to the smile you always wore? Why are you hiding your emotions?" he asked. Henry remained silent. "You said that everyone else has given up on you, right? Then why don't we take things slow? Let's rebuild our friendship together," said George. Henry remained silent, refusing to answer. He just looked down at the table, unable to meet his eyes. "I know I hurt you by leaving so abruptly. I should have known you were struggling. But Henry, you're worth so much more than anyone in the world. You're smart, funny, caring, brave and kind," said George emphatically. "Yes, I am working on myself. Probably I have always aimed for perfection, and it probably affects my relationships. Maybe this is why people give up on me. No one wants to deal with someone who isn't perfect, or a perfectionist who can't learn from his mistakes," said Henry. George patted his shoulder and gave a gentle smile. "Let's start fresh from now on, okay?" Henry smiled weakly and nodded. The rest of their lunch date consisted of George telling stories about his job and Henry listening intently. They talked about their best times and how popular their friendship was. They finished their meal, paid the bill and left the restaurant. George offered to drive home, but Henry insisted that he would walk. Henry and George hugged each other tightly. "Thank you," said Henry. "For what?" asked George, puzzled. "Everything," answered Henry honestly. Henry walked under the brightly lit sky. He was feeling new energy in himself after years. He gazed at the stars and thought, "It's never too late to make things right. It's better to apologize, forgive, change and love more."